was one of the most famous soldiers in cinematic history. A Green Beret, a war hero, a man haunted by a past that wouldn't let him go. Betrayed by the country he fought for, he was a lone warrior, pushed into a war he didn't want. In a world that had turned against him, he had only one constant companion. One tool that never failed him, his key to survival. And this was his weapon. For a generation, this blade was the ultimate symbol of military survival. But the strange truth is, this legendary military knife was never issued to any soldier. It wasn't born in a government armory, it was born in Hollywood. And yet, it changed the real-world knife industry forever. So how did that happen?
Hey, John Hickok here.
This is the story of how the Rambo knife, what was intended to be just a movie prop, changed the real world of tactical knives. When the producers of First Blood were preparing the film, they knew the knife couldn't just be a random prop. It had to be a character, a co-star. It needed to tell the story of John Rambo all by itself. They sought out a legend in the knife-making world, Jimmy Lyle of Arkansas. Lyle was known for his tough, no-nonsense fixed blades. He was given the task of creating a blade that looked like it could survive hell and help its owner do the same. The design Lyle created was a masterpiece of cinematic storytelling. The blade was a massive quarter-inch thick piece of steel with a terrifying clip point, a nod to the classic Bowie. It was oversized, aggressive, and designed to look absolutely indomitable on the big screen. But its most iconic feature was the double row of saw teeth machined into its spine. This wasn't a subtle wood saw. These were brutal, ripping teeth, designed to suggest the knife could tear through the fuselage of a helicopter or shred concertina wire. It was a visual promise of raw, destructive power. But the true revolution was the handle. It was hollow, a waterproof compartment sealed by a screw-on pommel cap. Inside, Lyle placed a small survival kit: fishing line, hooks, needles for sutures, and a strip of waterproof matches. This was the feature that sold the fantasy of the one-tool option. Everything a man needed to survive was right there, in his hand. To complete the package, the pommel cap itself was a tool, a precision compass for navigation, with a lanyard hole for paracord. The cordage could then be wrapped around the handle for extra grip. Jimmy Lyle hadn't just made a knife. He had forged a complete survival philosophy into a single, unforgettable object. A blade that was about to become a legend. If First Blood was a spark, its 1985 sequel, Rambo: First Blood Part 2, was a cultural firestorm. The tragic veteran was transformed into a one-man army, a global action hero. The film was a colossal blockbuster, and it took Jimmy Lyle's knife from a niche object of admiration to an international icon. The knife was now a star in its own right. In the sequel, it was bigger, blacked out, and even more central to the action. It was used to set traps, dismantle enemy hardware, and perform impossible feats of survival. And with every cinematic kill, the demand in the real world exploded exponentially. Although there was demand from the first film, it was nothing compared to what came from the second film. This was a tsunami. It wasn't a gold rush like with Crocodile Dundee. This was an arms race. Dozens of companies, both in the US and overseas, began churning out their own versions of the Rambo knife. They were marketed with names like Mission Master, Jungle King, and Predator. Almost all of them featured the three key ingredients: a massive Bowie-style blade, a menacing sawback spine, and the all-important hollow handle with a compass pommel. The market was flooded with cheap knockoffs and high-quality homages alike. Jimmy Lyle's custom creation had accidentally invented an entirely new category of weapon that dominated the 1980s: the commercial survival knife. It was a multi-million-dollar industry, built on the back of a fictional character. But as millions of these fantasy knives made their way into the real world, a serious question had to be asked. Was the fantasy actually practical? The Rambo knife was a commercial juggernaut, a cultural icon. But as millions of them landed in the hands of aspiring survivalists, a backlash began to brew. The very people who relied on knives for their lives, soldiers, outdoorsmen, and survival instructors, started to point out that the fantasy had a fatal flaw. And it was built right into the knife's core design: the hollow handle. While it was a brilliant piece of cinematic storytelling, in the real world, it is a catastrophic structural weakness. A proper survival knife is full tang, meaning a single solid piece of steel runs from the tip of the blade to the end of the handle. This makes it virtually indestructible. But the Rambo knife's blade was only connected to the handle by a thin, welded screw. Under any serious stress, the kind you would actually encounter in a survival situation, like chopping wood for a fire or prying open a container, that thin connection point is prone to snapping. The result? You are left with a broken, useless handle in one hand and a dangerous, sharp piece of steel in the other. Your one tool option has become a zero tool option. The famous saw-back spine was another feature that often failed in reality. Most of the mass-produced versions had teeth that were designed to look menacing, not to cut efficiently. They would often snag and shred wood rather than sawing through it. A small, dedicated folding saw weighing only a few ounces was infinitely more effective. Even the survival kit was a gimmick. The tiny, liquid-filled compasses were notoriously unreliable, and the contents were too minimal to be of real use. But this wasn't a failure of Jimmy Lyle's original vision. He was asked to create a magnificent movie prop, and he succeeded brilliantly. The failure was in the industry that followed, marketing this specialized cinematic tool as the ultimate real-world survival solution. So, was the Rambo knife a failure? As a pure survival tool, its design was compromised, but as a cultural artifact, it may be one of the most important knives of the 20th century. For better or for worse, this Hollywood prop single-handedly introduced the very idea of survival preparedness to a mainstream audience of millions. It created the commercial market that thrives to this day, and its famous flaws forced the real world to innovate. The entire industry of bomb-proof, full-tang survival knives that now exists is a direct response to the problems the Rambo knife exposed. It was a flawed masterpiece, a fantasy that forced the real world to get serious about what a survival knife should truly be. It may not have been the best knife ever made, but it was, without a doubt, one of the most influential.